Now, this is of particular interest, I would think, to our listeners in New South Wales. The issue of land clearing in our state affects, well, all of us really, directly or indirectly, something for which the New South Wales government's been trying to find a solution with the right balance for, it has to be said, a very long time. About 8 years ago, the former coalition state government introduced the Biodiversity Offset Scheme and loosened the restrictions on land clearing. So today, the state government is announcing it will commit to a new statewide nature strategy, including significant changes to the controversial Biodiversity Offset Scheme, now, which it says will rein in land clearing on private land. So the changes have been based on the recommendations of two reviews, one of them, Biodiversity Conservation Act, and that was led by the former Treasury Secretary Ken Henry, and an internal review of the Local Land Services Act. So I've got James Trezise, Biodiversity Council Director and Environmental Policy Expert, on the line with me. G'day, James.
Hey, Tim. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for joining us. Let's just be clear first. Tell us and tell all of us what about the Biodiversity Offset Scheme. What is it and what was it intended to do?
Oh, well, biodiversity offsets are a mechanism that are used to, I guess, justify developments and to try and compensate for the impacts of habitat destruction. Now, in New South Wales, we've just got to remember that the government itself released a report a few months ago which said 50% of New South Wales threatened species are likely to go extinct in the next 100 years. And so we really need to tackle the drivers that are causing that extinction risk, and that includes habitat destruction.
Yeah, we were talking the other day about this extraordinary issue we've got with feral goats too. So is it not just the native species? It must be, well, just about everything, flora, fauna, the lot.
Oh, 100%. It's habitat destruction and invasive species. It's also fire. We can all remember the horrible fires of 2019-20. So there is a complex suite of drivers of biodiversity decline in New South Wales and across Australia. But that Biodiversity Outlook report specifically identified habitat destruction as being the leading driver of biodiversity decline in New South Wales.
Yeah. How important is this? How important to get it right? What's at stake?
Oh, it's critically important. Like I just said, New South Wales will lose more than 500 species if we don't get this right under current policy settings. Half of threatened species are predicted to go extinct. And at the moment, since the 2016 legislation came into play, New South Wales has seen about 600 football fields a day of native vegetation, native habitats be destroyed on average. So it's a really significant issue, as is tackling invasive species. And what we've seen today is a really important step forward, and it deals with some of these issues and, especially as you allude to, reforming biodiversity offsets, because that has been a real big problem for New South Wales. Multiple reviews, multiple investigations. The system hasn't been working as it's been set out to do.
Yeah, but gee, James, 8 years. Why does it take so long to sort these things out?
Oh, well, I think you can put a good dose of politics in around that.
Yep.
But yeah, there is complexity around some of these systems. But yeah, it's taken way too long to get to where we are now. Credit to Minister Sharp and the Minns Government on getting on with it, but the proof will be in the pudding from here on in about introducing reforms and seeing the detail, because what we've seen is a lot of high-level statements in the response to the review today around strengthening biodiversity offsets, stopping them from being abused, setting a goal of net gain, and making sure that there's proponents or developers try to avoid impacts on nature before they just run to trying to find land elsewhere or paying money into a fund. So those are really important steps, along with things like a nature strategy. But there is a lot of work to be done to get this reform over the line, and there are probably some big gaps in this reform. They haven't gone all the way to what Ken Henry recommended in his review.
At this time of the day, we're going right throughout the state of New South Wales, and many listeners literally all over the state. And I'm guessing, and if you want to give us a call, please do, and we'll be talking to a farmer ourselves in a tick, 1300 222 702. They may just say, well, why should the government have anything to do with what I do on private land?
Well, I think that there's a range of incentives to offer to landholders, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we don't lose what makes Australia, what makes New South Wales special. We can't afford to lose any more native habitats, and there are a suite of tools available to governments to try and protect the environment. There is the stopping land clearing, and there is the providing incentives. Now, I think it's really important that what was announced today actually doesn't really dramatically affect the land clearing codes, and I think that's one of the gaps. So there is a review that's been announced by the Natural Resources Commission, but we haven't seen anything in what was announced today that is going to really dramatically affect the native vegetation clearing codes in New South Wales. And so I think there is some gaps. Similarly, there has been no proposal for any no-go zones that were recommended by Ken Henry. So again, there's a big challenge. The government's talked a big game and set up some really important goalposts for them to try and achieve, and the proof will be in how they look to progress that through both state parliament, but over the years to come through other reform processes. Yeah,
biodiversity. Could I throw in, and we had a very large conversation about this in regard to invasive species, and not just the goats, but I mean foxes and feral cats and goodness knows what out there. You know, almost you say to yourself, we're almost being overrun by all of these invasive species. Are they part of this overall plan or planning as well?
So the government is committed to establishing a statewide nature strategy, and that will include goals for not just recovering threatened species, but managing major threats. And so with invasive species, what we know is that you need integrated pest management across landscapes. So it's not just work happening in national parks or state forests, it's also integrated across what local land services do and local properties. But fixing having a really strong approach to threat abatement, so that we know that efforts to control feral foxes, feral cats are spread evenly across the landscape are really important. And the main thing for that, though, is investing money. Yeah. And we need to see strong investments across both the environment and primary industries portfolios to tackle invasive species.
Yeah, right. The report, I think it goes back investigation, I think The Guardian did it, and it goes back a few years. Problems with the scheme, including developers paying to protect land that was already protected. I mean, obviously there was a lot of issues with it, wasn't there?
Biodiversity offsets, absolutely. Yeah. And so that is one of the things that we welcome most in what was announced today, is that they're adjusting the goals for what we want to see out of biodiversity offsets from no net loss to setting a goal of net gain, making it harder for people to access that fund where you pay money into instead of actually driving your project to avoid critical habitats for threatened species, and removing some of these complex discounts that are set up for things that should happen anyway, like mine site rehabilitation. That should be happening anyway. You shouldn't get a discount for your environmental impacts and offsets for mine site rehabilitation. Yeah, all right.
I've got a couple of text here. This one anonymous, and I'm going to chat to Oscar Pearce, a farmer, in a tick. Could you check on the forestry road for Tunga State Forest? Has been closed for approximately 2 years. Emergency services like fire can't get in there. Forestry Armidale say they're trying to get funding and can't get it. That's from an anonymous texter. Any truth in that? I mean, that whole issue, by the way, of emergency services getting through and state forests, I mean, that's part of it too, surely, James?
Oh, look, maybe I'm not across that particular case or that detail.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, James. Thanks for your time. Good to talk to you.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Yeah, cheers. James is a Biodiversity Council Director, environmental policy expert.